All right, now what many of you have come here for. Science Mike McHargue, would you like to come on out? Mike here is a deep thinker, a communicator, a wonderer, a wanderer, someone who grew up in a faith background, conservative faith background like many of us. He lost that. He became deeply curious about the world, deeply skeptical about the assertions of faith as we inherited it. And the process has rediscovered God and spirituality in a whole new way. So as a founding member of Liturgists podcast network, Science Mike reaches millions of people through his podcast, Ask Science Mike. And today, he's going to be talking to us about whatever he wants. Let's have Science Mike. Let's welcome him again.
You know what's really fun? To be on stage during the intro. That's not embarrassing at all.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I'm so mortified over everything my job entails, like dragging cables across the stage and having people applaud and do intros. I'm like a really self-conscious and shy person, so clearly public figure was the best job for me. I have great news. Your brains are tired because you've heard a lot today, but I'm a college dropout podcaster, so my talk is pretty easy to follow compared to everybody else today. I don't have the mental horsepower to come up with everything else that has come up today. And I was trying to think, like, what do I talk about end of the day? I actually prepared 4 talks because I didn't know where everybody else would go today. And luckily the one I set the slides for still kind of has a little bit of ground left for us to talk about. But everything I prepared was based on questions people attending had sent in. So one place we haven't really gone, at least deeply today, is the idea of, double click, that's a synthesizer. There we go. I think somebody assisted in the back, thank you. Okay, so there's this guy named Ray Kurzweil, kind of known in the transhumanist world, and I've been following this guy for a long time. I actually read his original book when it came out called The Age of Intelligent Machines. I don't know exactly, I feel like that's around 1990, that book. Then there's The Age of Spiritual Machines, which is around, actually Intelligent Machines is probably 95. That's about 99, I'm guessing. This is literally just me imagining how old I was when I read those books. And then The Singularity is Near is, I believe, 2005, because my daughter Macy wasn't born yet, but my daughter Madison was. So these are all about machines thinking. And that's where we get, the term singularity I always think about in physics, but transhumanists have borrowed it to talk about a specific event in future human history. And what's funny to me about Ray Kurzweil being such a formative thinker in this movement is what he's really famous for is the synthesizer. That's not a coincidence, the Kurzweil name on the books and on the synths. But Ray's a very smart guy. He's, I believe, still a fellow at Google because, Google is really into weird tech stuff. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of start by making sure we all know what we're talking about, because I've noticed, maybe it's just me, but there has been some assumption today by people on stage that we all know what they're talking about. And I've had to Google a few things myself. So when I talk about the singularity, oh no, that's right, okay. The singularity is the merger of human technology and human intelligence. That's typically how it's defined among transhumanists. And I like graphs. I have a lot of graphs today. So this is that depicted visually. And so basically, the entire premise. Excuse me for being pedantic for a moment. Let's look at this chair. Because I want you to see the entire graph in its full glory. There's a green line. That's human intellect over time. This is kind of what the assumption is based on. It increases as evolution happens. And then you have a red line, and that's what computer or machine intelligence is doing. You can see it kind of moving from 1950 to 2000, and then that's a nice exponential curve. And there's this place where they meet, and because this growth rate, there's this place where machine intelligence is much higher than human intelligence. And then this blue line intersecting the two is like, maybe that's transhumanism, or maybe it's human extinction, who knows? And this is all based around one notion that's really talked about often in transhumanist circles, and that's, will computers surpass human brains by 2030? 2030 is not that far off. In this current election cycle, it feels like it might be really far off, but in terms of human eras of time, that's actually not that long, even in a given human's life. And what we're talking about is the reigning champion of computational power. This is the human brain. This is not the scale. But that is very much like what your brain would look like if you took it out of your skull, which I do not recommend that you do. Your brain is about the consistency of Jell-O. So if you took your brain out of your skull and you set it on a table, it would sag a little bit, which is super gross. The outer layer of your brain is called the neocortex. That's about as thick as a tortilla and contains more than half the neurons in your brain. And it's wrinkly. So the neocortex kind of folds down into the brain and back out, which is important for certain types of neural switching, which is fascinating, probably only to me. And the human brain is the most intricate and complex arrangement of matter in the universe, according to human brains, oddly enough. So that's why I like neuroscience. It's the only science where something studies itself. Somebody groaned, thank you. That was epic dad joke. So are computers starting to challenge this form of intelligence? Well, let's look at some events in society and see if that red line trajectory is lining up, if it looks like it's going to pass the green line. Go back to about 1997, and this is Gary Kasparov having a bad day. Because he was the grandmaster at chess, world champion, and he's playing a mainframe named Deep Blue, and it's not going well. I believe this is the move before checkmate. Or this is checkmate. I mean, I'm not real good at chess. Seems like there's a lot of pieces left. I don't know. Anyway, you know how it unfolds. He loses. That was a big deal. People are like, wow, you get really smart. But then people would say, yeah, but it's chess. It's not like they can understand language, they being computers. And then this happened. And another IBM computer named Watson just really decimated human players in a game of Jeopardy, a series on Jeopardy, actually. One of the things it was really good at, by the way, was buzzer timing. So there's a big thing in Jeopardy. You have an advantage on how you can time your buzzer. You know what computers are great at? Time. So they would just always buzz in exactly if they knew the answer. You'll notice I'm also using non-gender specific pronouns for machine, which I think is good. I'm absolutely certain IBM's Watson doesn't have any of the corresponding hardware. So Watson won in language, but then people said, okay, it's really doing very clever Google searches. It doesn't understand its winnings. Chess, you can kind of brute force mathematically. Language, you can parse through, relational databases, and probability. But there's one game called Go that computers will never beat people at because it's played with instinct. In the game of Go, there are more possible moves than there are atoms in the universe. So nobody wins Go through like skull power. People play Go with their guts. And, well, 2017, the world champion at Go got beat by a machine called AlphaGo. And this was a massive movement in machine intelligence, an absolutely massive movement, because this machine played with instinct, and it played with ferocity. This machine redefined the game of Go, so the best Go players in the world now study this machine playing the game to learn to play better. And it represented a new type of machine learning. So what you basically had with Deep Blue and Watson were the brute force of man hours into a machine. A computer played the collective wisdom of all the programmers that contributed to it and all the masters of the game that they studied. It's a force multiplier for the human brain. AlphaGo was different. They told AlphaGo the rules of Go, and then they just let it watch people play, and it came to its own conclusions about how to play the game of Go. See what I'm saying? That's a big deal. So, then they made another version of AlphaGo to play the old version, and this version was called AlphaGo Zero, and they forced it to learn Go from first principles, meaning it never got to watch a human master play or watch anyone play. It played against itself and learned from that. How good was AlphaGo Zero? AlphaGo Zero, that's the version who learned from first principles, dominated AlphaGo Master, winning 99 out of 100 games the first time they played. It's also kind of cool that took 7 seconds for those two computers to play each other in 100 games. It's relevant. Okay? So, wow. How long did it take AlphaGo Zero to become the best player of Go in the history of Earth? 40 days. They just let it just play by itself. Nobody supervising. And they just looked at its win ratio, and they let it run little tournaments against the other code. And AlphaGo Zero is so wildly good at Go. It's so wildly and unbelievably good at Go that people stop studying AlphaGo Master and people who play Go now just study how this machine plays Go to try to get better. It has changed the game. Which is kind of something I want to point out. This is really the first time an AI took a human activity and came up with its own approach. And the way AlphaGo plays is so wildly different from the way anyone has ever played the game of Go that it is completely alien. It's unrecognizable, the tactics and strategies that AlphaGo uses to play the game of Go. So it is true. When will computers surpass human intelligence? Well, at the games of chess, Jeopardy, and Go, it's already happened. At stock trading, it's already happened. In many, many things, it's already happened. It's in the past. But when machines come up with their own strategies through machine learning and deep data, they don't do things the way that we do them, which is kind of scary. Now that machine learn line, that red line, if you'll think back to that slide, we'll see it again in a moment, is based on something called Moore's Law. Now I know everyone can read all the fine print on this slide from your seat, no big deal. All I want you to know is next to each one of these little blue dots or blue cubes, there's a word, and that's the name of that processor. And all we're looking at is history along this axis, and the number of transistors on a given microprocessor. Okay? Moore's Law is the idea originally that every 24 months the number of transistors on a given die or chip doubles. which does one of two things. It gives you the same performance 2 years later for half the cost, or twice the performance at the same cost. That's what Moore's Law did, and that powered the computer industry from 1970 all the way to today. And there's Apple's A12X Bionic is on there. That's an iPad chip, for those of you with iPads. So this, if you follow this, this is what you call an exponential growth curve. That's where you get the red line. Small problem. It doesn't really work anymore. If you actually look at the performance increases that we are getting out of doubling the transistor count, you see we were following an exponential curve, but we've been slowing to the point now that we're actually flattening out. So if the red line in machine intelligence is driven by a combination of software sophistication and the underlying execution capacity of the hardware, wow, I just heard that sentence. I'm sorry if you're not in computer science. I guess I heard it come out like that's not very accessible. The red line is slowing down. So I want to be clear, we have a tendency, we do two things as Homo sapiens, as people. We look at exponential growth curves and ignore them to our peril, and then get squashed by some kind of technological revolution, or we go all in at the early part of an exponential curve that ends up flattening and wildly mispredicting the future. That's why predicting the future is hard. So, this red line, my point is, might actually be looking more like this, which changes the conversation. I don't know. It might be. Why? Because physics is getting real tired of our shit. Real tired. So we keep making transistors smaller and smaller and smaller, and electrons have a really annoying property in physics. They can teleport. They can go from point A to point B without passing the points in between them. So if transistors get too small, I want you to imagine trying to build a corn maze for mutant children who could teleport. But they can only teleport so far. They can only teleport 6 feet. So as long as you keep the corn channels 7 feet wide, they have to follow the maze. But as soon as you get a 5.5 foot gap, they just right through the wall. That's what electrons are doing in our microprocessors. It's called current leakage. That's why I'm having a hard time keeping Moore's Law going. I just wanted to leave this slide with profanity up the longest, because I have a slightly subversive personality. So what I think is that predictions around the singularity and artificial intelligence are oversimplified to the point of absurdity. That we tend to look at the future of machine intelligence either like this, that's the Matrix, Terminator, and HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Those are what we call bad machines. Or, not bad machines, it'll be good machines. These computers are our friends, right? Who doesn't love that funky R2-D2 and that uptight C-3PO, right? Like, I literally wanted to be Commander Data. I'm not even, like when I was in middle school, if someone would talk to me, I'd do this in my head. Just because I watched so much Star Trek, and I wished it was a robot. And Cortana from the Halo series, Master Chief could carry around in his helmet and always know the answer to any question. Alexa, how's the weather? You know what I mean? Like, these are the archetypes with which we explore machine intelligence and machine thinking. And I think the problem there is we're putting too many human assumptions on the behavior of machines. That the questions we're asking ourselves are actually far more difficult and far more nuanced to answer if they could be answered at all. You know, something I get asked all the time. Would an artificial intelligence have personhood? I mean, what's a person? Could you think we could all agree on a definition of a person in this room? Have we agreed as a nation, legally, what a person is? Or let's say when personhood begins? That's one of the most enduring divides in our culture. So, I'm just going to answer that question real quick. I'm just kidding. I'm not that dumb. But I do think we have to think about, if we're going to talk about transhumanism, we have to understand what people are, which means we have to understand, like, what do we think makes people people? I think a large part of what makes people people is consciousness, is awareness. And as we all know, consciousness is well defined and well understood. Thank you. This guy named Michio Kaku, who's a physicist. Now, here's what I like about physicists. They don't have to have expertise in something to believe they have the answer to the question. Because they're like, well, whatever your problem is, it's still just physics. Biology, just physics. Right? Computer science, just physics. But in this case, I actually really do like Kaku's way of understanding consciousness. Because if you talk to philosophers and you talk to neuroscientists, you can really get in the mire. And I like this model that it's like, got some fidelity to it, and it does help us think about consciousness in useful ways. So Kaku says that consciousness is a series of interconnected feedback loops between a model of reality and reality itself. Everybody got it? Great, cool. Don't have to spend more time on it. I'm kidding. So this is how he says it precisely. Consciousness is the number of feedback loops required to create a model of your position in space with relationship to other organisms over time. That clarification, I think, helped everyone. Basically, according to Kaku, the most basic consciousness that exists in reality is this. This is exactly one feedback loop. What is the feedback loop? Your thermostat is conscious. What does it know? The temperature. So this thermostat, as soon as it becomes 67 degrees, says, it's getting too hot. I better do what? Turn on the air conditioning. And then the temperature starts to change. Actually, no, this is on heat. Excuse me, I got it exactly backwards. So when it gets cold enough, it's too cold in here. It turns on the heat, and it increases the temperature. I always find an analogy helpful if you reverse it in the first stage of explanation. Then when the temperature gets where it wants it, it turns the heat back off and starts to cool off again. So the thermostat can change its environment and be aware of the changes and respond to it in exactly one way, or one feedback loop. The feedback loop being between what the temperature is and what the thermostat wants it to be. Kaku calls that a level 0 consciousness. By this metric, computers are already conscious. It's not creepy at all. It's not creepy at all. It's not creepy at all. The next level 0, like a more sophisticated level 0 consciousness, would be plants. Plants have lots of feedback loops. They know soil pH, they know the direction of the sun, they know the temperature, they know if anybody's chewing on them, they know if they have parasites. They can actually send signals through their roots and through the atmosphere to each other to change their chemistry in response to predation and drought. If you watch plants in time lapse, they move, they turn toward the sun. By the way, vegans, feel like we have to be kind to animals? Because animals are kind? I kind of agree with that. Because compared to plants, even tigers are pretty kind animals. Plants are ruthless organisms. We should eat them. Because if they had the chance, they would kill us. Plants love to try, their entire life, they start at the ground and as quickly as possible try to grow to do what? Cast shade. You know why? Because if there's more shade, anything below me is not getting light and can't come take the light from me. Ever since I realized that, when I drive down the road and look at all the beautiful green, lush scenery, all I can see is plants trying to strangle each other. Nature, he's scared. Okay. So this is a level 0 consciousness. What's after level 0? Clearly level 1. The world of a beetle is so much more complex than the world of a plant. For example, if you're a plant and you want to mate, what do? You just literally throw your reproductive cells all in the air and make everybody sneeze, right? When plants get amorous, we sneeze. Beetles, sorry if that is a difficult construct for you to carry out of this room. I hope the next time you sneeze, you think of that. Okay, so, beetles, they have to find other beetles to make more beetles. They have to find food or they die, and they have to avoid getting eaten by stuff that can eat them, so they have many hundreds of feedback loops to build a model of reality. More complex than that, social mammals. I don't know why I picked this picture. I don't even know what's happening. What is this? Like I'm squinting my nose, and is this a fight? I don't understand what's happening. It's a dominant. I do get that. I don't mean I don't understand it's a dominant display. I'm saying I don't understand. This wolf is back, and this wolf is on his feet, his or her. Which means for there to be pressure on the nose, that this wolf is pressing their nose into this wolf's mouth. Just think about it, it's weird. It has nothing to do with the talk. I just looked at this image for literally hours trying to figure that out. Like, why is the nose curved? Back to the story. Back to the story. I'm tired too. Wolves have to have thousands of feedback loops because they not only have to know everything a beetle has to know, they have to imagine what other wolves know. So if this is a dominance display, these wolves have to know what they think about each other, and also imagine what that wolf, if you're this wolf, you have to think about what this wolf thinks about other wolves too, which means you have to run a shadow copy of the wolf in your own brain. You with me? That's crazy. Wolves keep copies of other wolves in their pack in their brains, as do all social mammals, not social insects. Eusociality is different. I'd probably say eusociality is like a level 1+ consciousness. Although, never mind, you won't get into that. Superorganisms veer off. Okay. But this is a level 2 consciousness. After level 2 comes level 3. Good job. That's us. We're the only level 3 consciousness on the planet. Now you'd say, hey, that's not cool. What about dolphins and elephants and chimpanzees? You haven't heard what makes a level 3 consciousness yet. And that is primarily an awareness of time. So don't hear me wrong. So let's debase one notion. Humans aren't the smartest animals on the planet. Let's think of like a really sophisticated human activity. Art, criticism, and appreciation. We have the ability to not only appreciate art, but there's actually people whose jobs, whose actual occupations are to pick out forgeries from real paintings. Do you know who's better at that than art critics? Pigeons. I'm not kidding. If you train a pigeon by printing, and this is the actual experiment. You make little miniatures that are high resolution of art in a pigeon art gallery. And they get used to one artist's work, and then you take a forgery of a piece they haven't seen yet, and another piece by that artist that they also haven't seen yet, and you give them food for picking which one is by the original artist. Pigeons are better at that than art critics. Pigeons. We prioritize a particular type of thinking culturally and say people are the best. Well, my point is, there's lots of types of intelligence in the world, and we just happen to be really good at thinking that involves time. We're really good at yesterday, and we're really good at tomorrow. We are particularly bad at today compared to most animals, sadly enough. It's the way our brains are built. Our brains, see, we think of our brains as like the pinnacle of evolution, right? If you look at it evolutionary, brains got hired by bodies to solve problems. Your brain's not like the most important part of the organism. When we as transhumanists talk about uploading our brains, we start equating personhood with this, which ignores vast swaths of human intelligence. Some of those sophisticated parts of our intelligence don't happen in our brains at all. Our brains were designed to navigate natural spaces, to avoid getting eaten, and to deal with things bigger than sand. That's why we don't understand quantum physics, because our intuition wasn't made for it. So when we think about it, artificial intelligence, we tend to pretend computers are brains, which is why we suck at making robots, by the way. We'll get to that in a second. So when we think about AI, we think about the singularity, and we think about a potential merger of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. I think we need to have a better understanding of how intelligence works, both natural and artificial. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is something called an artificial narrow intelligence, or an ANI. What is an ANI? We have those all over the place right now. Here's a few examples. Watson would be an artificial narrow intelligence. It's really good at playing Jeopardy. Since then, Watson's gotten pretty good at diagnosing medical conditions. In some cases, outperforming doctors. Self-driving cars are an artificial narrow intelligence. They do a pretty good job of navigating the world. The new Tesla self-summon feature has been used 500,000 times already and only struck 6 people. So they're not perfect. Amazon.com is an amazing assortment of artificial narrow intelligence that are designed to separate you from your money. And they are very, very good at it. So when we take artificial narrow intelligence, in some cases we're approaching human capability. Don't get me wrong, I kind of throw a smack at Tesla for hitting people. People hit people in cars all the time. I was recently diagnosed with narcolepsy, which was so glad to know that's why people teleport in front of my car all the time. It's because I have a brain condition that makes me sleep while I drive. I'm not driving so much anymore, don't worry about it. But I can totally understand why a machine would be like, where did they come from? My brain does that too. But Amazon, has there ever been a human-driven organization better at separating people from money than that machine? I mean, honestly. What percentage of your personal spending is an ANI convincing you to buy something you don't need through a recommendation engine? That is actually a really sophisticated multi-dimensional model. So that's an artificial narrow intelligence. Those are already surpassing human intelligence all the time, with a small caveat that can usually only do one thing. So when we think about AI, what we usually mean is an artificial general intelligence. That would be an artificial machine learning system that could do pretty much everything people can do. And this is why we get freaked out, is because we look at how good computers are at math. Math is hard for everybody. Even mathematicians, math is hard. And so we're like, wow, computers are so good at the thing that's hardest to us, just wait till they do things that are easy for us. And that kind of ignores the entire architecture of how our brains work. You know, I told you about the neocortex, that tortilla on the outside of the brain. That's where math lives. And we've had a neocortex for, I don't know, 500,000 years? They're pretty new. The other stuff we do so amazingly happens in the deeper structures of our brains and in our bodies. So if you look at Jeopardy or AlphaGo or calculating digits of pi, yeah, computers dominate our neocortex. But if you look at running on a sandy beach, a 5-year-old child is more sophisticated than the most sophisticated robots that we can build. Why? Because humans aren't brains. humans are brain-body systems. And the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment's little brother we call white supremacy, has tried to convince us that we're all just brains. But there's a deeper wisdom to the human animal that happens in neurons. And in fact, when we make robots like these back here that are remarkably agile, do you know how we do it? Tiny brains with smart bodies. We put intelligence in the structure of limbs and the elasticity of joints and the sophistication of local actuators, not building a model of reality that's cerebral, but simply pressure and height and distance. When we teach computers to fail as elegantly as our bodies do, suddenly they're good at walking too. So is this what's happening by 2030? Do we have this exponential curve where computers will first pass insect brains and mice brains and then human brains and then eventually all human brains? I don't know. I said earlier that I think people who believe in the singularity, they probably overestimate Moore's law, and that a general artificial intelligence may be farther away than expert consensus says, and potentially much farther away, including maybe never. That's a very popular thing to say at a transhumanist conference. I just heard people go, what? I stayed all day to hear that? Come on, Micah. Don't invite Science Mike again. Here's the good stuff. What if we do get to an artificial general intelligence? Then you have to ask yourself another question. What would you do if you could make your own brain? You'd be an artificial superintelligence. That's a machine intelligence that has the general capabilities of human brain, but is more intelligent than a human brain. Because if you could design your own brain, you change the pace of the development of intellect altogether. So we tend to look at the world like this. And we tend to think of like, this is from Wait But Why, which is like my favorite blog in the world. I didn't do this, I'm not this clever. We tend to think of like, there's these stair steps of awareness and intelligence. It's like an ant, they're pretty dumb. But that's how we think of it. We think of ants are pretty dumb. Then chickens are smarter than ants. And then chimpanzees are smarter than chickens. We're so much smarter than chimpanzees. Wow. Are we though? Did you know that for chimpanzees, there are two primate species that wage war, chimpanzees and humans? We're the only two that do it. For chimpanzees to wage war, they need a 27% differential in the size of the two groups. Otherwise, they think it's mutually assured destruction. You know what hominids need? 3%. You take away force multipliers in technology. You go back to early hominids with sharpened sticks. We would war with a 3% population differential, which means for as long as there's been hominids, the number one way for hominids to die is being killed by other hominids. Are we smarter than chimpanzees? I don't know. Anyway, so we tend to think, well, if an AI comes along, it'll be like this smart. If you can design your own brain, it'll probably look more like this, where everything that has a neurological brain is over here, and machine intelligence like invents new physics to create better processors to try to escape the heat death of the universe. What's interesting though, is when I think about Amazon. Amazon.com, the machines that create Amazon, or Google, are conscious right now by Kaipu's understanding, but they're not sentient. They don't know they exist. They're not aware of their own actions. So what if we create a superintelligence that is very, very intelligent and highly conscious, but not sentient? That's kind of scary. AI could absolutely be intelligent without being self-aware. And if that happened, an AI's consciousness would be so alien that our language couldn't possibly describe its experiences. And quite disturbingly to me and other people who think about AI a lot, is that AI might relate to us the way we relate to bacteria, something small and fascinating to study. How many people have been racked with guilt when they wash their hands? Just crushed because of all the life you just destroyed. Right? You tend to only worry about life you're destroying if it has eyes and fur. That's usually the threshold. If it can be cute, you might care about killing it. And then maybe not if it's delicious. Thank you, that was a joke grenade. You throw it, you wait, it explodes. So, what if AI just thinks like, well, humans are okay, we don't want to wipe them out, we should keep like a sustainable breeding population of like 2,500. I like that laugh. Laughter is a pre-verbal way to release anxiety, so I know I really did well. Okay. Question people ask me a lot, would AI be moral given the bacteria question? Nobody knows. So when we think about AI, and when I mean AI, of course I mean artificial superintelligences, because they're the compelling ones to think about. We tend to think of like two ways they could do what they do. One would be AI solves all our problems. Climate change over, machines figured it out. That's the good one. The other one is AI eliminates us. Has anyone played the game Universal Paperclips?
Yeah!
Yes! One person. Universal Paperclips is a game where you pretend to be an AI, and your job is to create what? As many paperclips as possible. That's a completely feasible thing you could ask an AI to do. So at first, you make paperclips, and then you make like better ways of making paperclips with less wire, and then you start shutting down the paperclip market because if there's other people making paperclips, you have competitors, you need the most paperclips. And then as an AI, you realize people could be paperclips. The matter that's in people, properly handled, could just be paperclips, but you're aware that humans are self-aware and don't want to be paperclips. So you engineer a technology that hypnotizes people so they'll lay down and become paperclips without resistance. And then you realize the planet could be paperclips. So you turn the entire planet to paperclips, and then you're out of stuff to make paperclips with, and then you realize space is full of planets. So what is terrifying about AI is the incredible indifference with which it could destroy us because we gave it some mission. We'll get back to that in a second. Morality for humans is born in this tension between new brain structures and old brain structures. Social behavior is an evolutionary adaptation to the environment. That's what it is, it's what it does. So our most altruistic parts of our brain are the parts of our brain that are social, and the most selfish parts of our brain are pretty similar to what you find in a crocodile's brain. Crocodiles, if their children get too old and stay too close, they eat them, right? They're not altruistic. When we talk about that in Christian terms, spirit versus flesh to me is like neocortex and anterior cingulate cortex versus amygdala and orbitofrontal cortex, something like that. I think about everything in terms of the brain. What would this diagram look like for an artificial superintelligence? None of that stuff. There's no brain structures in an ASI, it's just code. Code being run rapidly with our assumptions placed in it without context. Did you know that algorithms tend to be really racist? Like deeply racist? And they're made by like liberals and libertarians in California. How could they be racist? It's almost like things that we make, our unexamined assumptions are placed within them. It was a huge issue for a while, like you would ask a smartphone to identify faces and it would only notice white faces. Almost like the machine didn't think dark-skinned people existed. So if we turn over managing our economies to artificial superintelligences, and most of the programmers are men, then what does that brilliant, contextless machine think about women? So The people who've been thinking about machine intelligence for the longest are sci-fi writers. One of those is Isaac Asimov. And he had this notion, well, what if you just gave robots 3 laws that kept them safe? I'm not going to repeat the 3 laws of robotics, but basically, what if you told computers to just keep people safe and happy? No matter what you do, computers, as you fix our problems, your number 1 priority is to keep humans safe and happy. We've got to keep existing, and we need to be happy. And if you're a computer and you watch humans, and you realize humans tend to kill each other, to keep them safe, you put them in cages. But if you put humans in cages, they're not happy. So then you implant electrodes deep in their brains and stimulate their pleasure nodes in their brain, so that they're always happy. So then you have humanity unconscious, just like, oh, all the time. Is that like an exciting future to you? Is that the eschatology you think Jesus wants? I don't know. Doesn't sound like heaven to me. So it's not enough to simply like try to use language to block the behavior of something that could be radically more intelligent than us. By the way, is this the most encouraging talk today? Or is it the most encouraging talk today? Okay. Last one that I get asked all the time is, or last line of questions. I don't know if you know, so far in my talk, there hasn't been a lot of the Christian part of transhumanism, so I thought I might try to reflect the spirit of the conference. So this is a question I get asked a lot. Would AI have a soul? To which I always reply, what is a soul? Every time I ask someone what a soul is, whether they're a theologian or just a believer, someone tells me something different every time. So I was like, I'll ask the dictionary. The most compelling thing you can do on stage is read the definition from the dictionary. The spiritual or immaterial part of a human being regarded as immortal. So would an AI have one of those? That's my memoji from my phone. I'm real proud of that. Just, do you know how long it took me to white chin in a memoji? Every time I send it to someone, they say, how'd you get the white chin? I don't even remember. Okay, my point is, would AI have a soul? My answer is, I don't know. And I'm skeptical of anyone who says they know. Of course, for me, that's not just would AI have a soul. Whenever people summon it, tell me they know what a soul is, I'm like, are you sure you know what a soul is? Or are you trying to be cool at Sunday school? Okay. That critique of systemic faith was free and included in your devotion. Which, like, here, we're going to go deep in the Christian stuff for a second. Is that okay? Is everybody like Christianing in the room? Okay. Because this is where, like, you gotta understand, like, I used to be a Southern Baptist. Don't know if there's Southern Baptists here today. I think the whole transhumanism thing means that's somewhat less likely. Then I was an atheist for a while. Those were good years. Was the only group of people I've ever been with who are more evangelical than evangelicals. And now I'm like, I don't know, faith is fun. This is the part where I'll probably get the most genuine though. But my point is, I always have to start off as a little cynical about religion to like appease my inner atheist. So, would AI need salvation? We are going to, so many assumptions we can ask that question. Here's what I know. Here's what I'm quite certain of. As certain as I get about things, which is not very. Should an artificial general or super intelligence emerge, it will challenge our most basic assumptions of faith and of life itself, especially if we're in cages. Or paper clips, let's be real. Let's just imagine that, like, we still haven't figured out how to treat all people like people. And then we throw in like a category of non-human persons who are even, I mean, let's be honest, we're a different species. Humans aren't that different from each other. Like, It's a pretty narrow range of biological traits and display features. Like the stuff we think is radical is like pigmentation, straighter curly hair. These are the traits where like, oh wow, these people are better. They grew up in a cloudy environment. Like what? It's from, my point is, evolutionary speaking, is ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like chimpanzees actually have races, anyway. So imagine now, like, I don't know, we've got disembodied machines that are aware and sentient and asking for labor protection inside of Amazon server farms. So, I mean, something wild. And in ways, they're smarter than us. In other ways, like, they don't get why we like cheese. I mean, can you relate to anything that doesn't understand why you like cheese? I don't know. My question is, as a Christian, is this idea of the cosmic Christ, thank you, Mike, is that invitation to partner in the reconciliation of all things truly universal? Would a God that made a creation that could then create things that were aware also want those things involved in the recreation of all, or the recreation, that would be awesome too, the reconciliation of all things. Because I think it's really important to remember that a human brain is not a human person. A human person is a human person. We've had hearts longer than we've had brains. Hearts can function without brains. Brains can't function without hearts. We talk all the time about what if we could upload our brains into a machine? Well, that simulated brain wouldn't work. It literally needs a heart to function, and our hearts are deeply tied to the function of our entire bodies. Our bodies are brilliant, and they are so often left out of these discussions, which, let's be honest, almost exclusively involve white men. I tend to think that if God is real, and if God is inviting us into reconciliation, God's cosmic understanding of us is even more different than an AI's would be. And that would be able to encompass both human and machine intelligence and understand a way in which we could all be invited into the renewal of all things. Now, one important point, and I cannot believe how I nailed the timing here of this talk. Like, it's exactly an hour long. I'm so happy. I didn't get to talk a lot about what it would be like to upload our brains, which was the second most common question I get about transhumanism. And my hope is that we can talk about it in the panel. And that's all I got. Thanks for listening.